sec. Once it says you're live, there we go. We're live.
Ah, I see. Okay. Okay, welcome back to Ursine Combo Lab Audio, a UCLA fighting game podcast. And today we have myself, Retro Age, and I'll let the others introduce themselves.
Yo, what's up? My name is 3K.
What's up, guys? Karushi Drive. I also go by Blue Tea.
And today we're going to talk about visual design in fighting games, as well as fighting games and controllers later on. So, who wants to start? I have Jump Force open in the background as a key game affected by visual design. We're gonna see how it looks.
Yeah, I guess I'll get started. So we're gonna talk about visuals, right? Visuals is such an expansive subject, especially with regards to fighting games across the past 10 years, even beyond. If we look at things from the 90s, one of the things that comes up first is stuff like Third Strike, stuff like CVS2, stuff like Garo Mark of Wolves, some of the best visuals in the sprite-based department. And then we fast forward to like the 08-09 era when Street Fighter 4 first hit and the advent of 2.5D became very popular for 2Ds. That's when we started to see a more distinct visual style that was kind of repulsive to a lot of people at first, but it grew over time as people started to realize that, hey, this was the more economical way for fighting games to keep going from here. And then, of course, if we go a little earlier to back when Virtual Fighter was first hitting the scene, stuff that was 3D in its manner was not very commonplace at all across any video game for that matter. And Virtual Fighter kind of stepped in the forefront in that regard, did it for the action genre, more specifically for the fighting game genre as well. But you got to keep in mind that Virtua Fighter was not really as much of a fighting game as it was a simulator at the time. But then we go into 2012-ish, 2011, and we see things like MVC3 and KOF13, which had very stellar visuals for their time. Of course, MVC3 continuing on with the 2.5D visual art style, and KOF13 perpetuating what a lot of people would say is probably the best sprite-based visuals ever, like in the entire industry, not just the FGC. And that says a lot because it did not really sell as well as that accolade would suggest. And then we go into kind of fast forward into like 2013, 14, where Unreal Engine started to become more popular as the engine of choice for the visuals department. This is especially the case for things like Exard, and then we go into SF5 as well as later on things like Dragon Ball Fighters and Sam Show. And we got to see a lot more Unreal Engine being used in not just the more so AAA fighting games, but also the less popular more indie fighting games as well. And fast forward today, we still see a lot of games using their own engines, things like Multiple Type Lumina and Undernight and Birth. They still use their own in-house engines for those games, but then we go to things like DNF and Strive, which both use, I believe, Unreal 4. And we don't often see Unreal 4 these days, even though Unreal itself has been popular. But it's like, to kind of give that overview of where we are right now, I think it's necessary to understand the context, like how things have progressed in the visuals department, because now we're going to talk about some more opinionated things, based on what I've just mentioned. So, Fox, feel free to get us started with what your thoughts are on like where we are with visuals right now and how that kind of affects people's experience with the game. You can approach it however way you want, because there's a lot of things that could potentially be touched on here.
Yeah, I guess I'll talk about more like a modern style graphics nowadays, I guess, in terms of visuals. I think for a lot of people nowadays, the visuals aren't really a problem. Like most people's graphics nowadays for fighting games are good enough. So I think that's kind of steered more of it towards the gameplay / character design. Like let's look at Guilty Gear Strive, for example. Probably the most popular fighting game or most well-known fighting game for like the general audience outside of the FGC. Like this is kind of funny, but like for example, whenever a new DLC character gets revealed for Strive, a lot of the times people are like, "Oh wow, this character looks so cool," and you see everyone like have profile pictures of them, even though they don't necessarily actually play the game. Like I bet like half the Bridget profiles on Twitter don't even play the game, but they just like the character design. because they do a very good job with the voice acting and how the character looks. So I think character design is very important, where having a distinct character, being able to recognize what they kind of look like and ideally what their gameplay is like from a glance, helps a lot in getting people interested in the game or the character. I think a good example of this, like, is if you look at like Potemkin, for example, in Strive, you can tell from a glance, like, even if I have never seen like any of his voice or like any move in the game, he's just a big burly guy, so he probably just does like a lot of like flow type of movement, like a brutish fighter, because of other games you've played. Or if you look at, for example, like Chip, there's like this chuny ass guy with a big ass ninja blade coming out of it. He's probably this degenerate little fucker that runs around the screen and shoots all these projectiles, or maybe not that, but you know. So I think in terms of visual, like the first thing that grabs the people's attention for the game is the character design, and then having those character designs is what people gets into the game, I think.
Yeah, well put. Regarding like the the so-called, I think it's the Baiken players meme. That's definitely the most notable example of what you described there.
Yeah,
But
can't wait to play Viking for the first time, guys.
I know, yeah, I know. And I must admit myself, back in like the Accent Core era, that was when I was a lot younger. I liked Baiken myself, but then like the minute, and like she was a lot differently designed than she is right now. But the minute I tried her, I was like, this is not for me, right? So I fell prey to that myself, I must say. And perhaps that was slightly different of a context, but the more things change, the more we start to realize how similar things are in that regard. I mean, what's worked back then still works now with regards to how you appeal to people. Back in like I think it was like '08 or '09 when KOF 12 released. I don't remember the exact year, but mine was not in the game, and people were rioting. I mean, there was a lot of other things wrong with KOF 12, but there was literally no buy, no buy, right? Like that same logic works right now. If you want people to have attention on it, you got to release characters like Jacko doing the pose, even if you don't like it, right? It's just the attention that it's the clout and the attention that honestly gets people hooked in some way, and then they'll actually take interest to what you've got in the actual gameplay or whatever. And that's to say that, hey, I mean, whatever marketing tactics you've got in your arsenal, make use of them.
Yeah, adding on to that, I'll say it more explicitly. The age is the age of the waifus.
Oh,
Like,
100%.
you need the waifus or husbandos, like, not necessarily to like sell your game, but definitely helps as like, I'd say like on average you definitely see a lot more Twitter discourse when there is like a new female fighter, like Bridget, or like a person that is like non-binary or something, like Testament, or Baiken, for example, Jacko, of course. Like, people get a lot more excited about that. It's also like similar thing when Street Fighter V, actually, they had a character designing contest where they let the fans make character designs, and then they like put them on the voting stuff. Even though there was a lot of cool like male character designs, surprise, surprise, a female character design of Jury got the won the contest. So yeah, nowadays, if you want to get people to like see your game, it feels like a lot of fighting games definitely make those like good female character designs to get people into the game. Like, I know, like when people saw Gold Lewis, people still were like, "Oh, Gold Lewis is so sick. His theme is so cool. It's just like this big, burly American guy that swings around this alien. Like, he's cool." But I feel like I did not see nearly as much fan art, you might say, of him as opposed to like when Minot got revealed or such. And oh yeah, go for it.
Oh yeah. I will say SF5 did not hold back with regards to how much they just really pushed the waifuism of the costumes that they released. Chun-Li has
exactly
some abominable number of costumes compared to like a number of male characters combined. I'm not sure the numbers.
I swear I could probably count the number of costumes Zeku has on one hand, and I would need like probably like the digits of maybe like 10 to 20 for Chun-Li, just Chun-Li, when like almost every single female character in that game has roughly like 10 or more costumes, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, no, exactly. And if we kind of shift over more to like I mean, I guess Strive is an anime fighter, but I was gonna, sorry, we were talking SF5, never mind. But like kind of going to anime fighters, right? When I think of kind of the first ones that got me more interested in like, whoa, this character looks cool. Like I remember, because you know, my first fighting game, I wasn't playing because it was cool, because it was like cool characters per se, but it was because it was cool like gameplay, right? But when
Yeah.
I started transitioning over to like KOF and BB, that was when it was like,
Hmm.
yo, this characters look cool and the game looks cool, and it's like a lot that I could learn. So let me try to pick it up. So when I was trying to learn KOF 13, character that immediately stood out to me was Leona, because she just looked
Hmm.
cool, like simple as that. And I was like, I need two other characters that look cool, right? Not hard to find in KOF 13, where everything looks cool for the most part.
Yeah.
So shipped over to Blaze Blue, where you just need one character. One character feel like it's not enough because there's so many unique
Yeah.
characters that are so like well designed and all of that. And I believe D Blizzard brought it up that how character attractiveness plays into choosing characters to play. I would definitely say that Rachel was like probably that one for me in Blaze Blue. Even
Hmm.
though like I didn't end up sticking it out with her when Kokonoha released, like I definitely say that that was part of what like motivated me to keep playing Blaze because the personality she has in the story mode is like, I think it's just too sick. That's just like kind of fanboyism though. I think that's not really like, oh, this character is a mass appeal to everybody. But
Yeah.
once you find that for yourself, like once you find that personally, I do think that is a huge factor to how you whether you stick out in a game that you like a lot. You know.
Hmm. I want to also like add something. This is a little bit more like I guess you can count it. I'd count it in visuals personally, but I think that sound design or SFX definitely affects how people appreciate your game, or just like characters in general. Because for example, like you hear this with a lot of characters, but for example, like let's look at Noelle from another anime fighting game, Melty Blood Lumina, right? Like
Mhm.
I think that character gameplay wise is pretty sick, and a lot of people were excited for her when she first got announced because they thought she had a really cool design and she had like the sick ass side staff, everything right. She had a really big buttons and she had a cool move set. But then you saw so many people when she actually got released, they said, "Dude, I cannot play this character because of how she sounds." You know, she gets hit, she
Yeah.
goes ooh ah, ooh ah, and I think that's another thing that can definitely dissuade people is like not just if your character looks cool, but they kind of have to match the like type of voice, or they have to, you know, have voice lines that are not annoying enough to where you want to drop the character, which I think some characters struggle with. Where you're just like, oh, gameplay wise or design wise, they're really sick, but I physically cannot play this character without, you know, grating my ears every time doing so. And just to go a little bit further with that, I think one game that does this very well is Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Like every character is very well voice acted, but also I
Oh
think
yeah.
that they have very memorable lines, which I think is the problem. Because if you ask me to be like, can you name an intro from Lumina or like a win quote, I'd be like, no, I cannot. Like you could have a gun pointed to my head. The only one I'd be able to tell you is like something about like one character interaction about them talking about a sandwich. Which is like what? Like they're talking about a sandwich, as opposed to, you know, Marvel where you can just be like, oh yeah, that's Spider Man. He's probably going, yeah, see you later, see you later, Maximum Spider. Or you see Nova on the screen, you can be like, oh yep, I can already hear him going, you like that? You like that? Energy javelin, energy javelin.
Yeah, great point actually. And you know, part of that too is like the plum sandwich one. It's funny you mentioned that because that line is actually like the generic special character matchup line. Because Saber's like not from the same universe or whatever. So like they just have like that generic line for every character in those situations. But then regarding MBC3, of course, it's English full English voice acting, which really helps as well. But all the characters are like already memorable from whatever series they come already, and that can definitely play a huge part in more easily like connecting with them with regards to like what their voice lines are. Now it's not automatic, of course. When we see things like Nick All Star Brawl, don't want to dunk on the game too hard because I feel like it's a low hanging fruit, but the visuals, already probably weren't the best. But then add on that there's no voice acting for these memorable characters, and suddenly you had all the life sucked out of them, just like that. And maybe we can talk about voice acting in a separate topic, but that definitely does play a role in how people can accept the visual appeal of any sort of like art-based medium. And more on like the visual appeal, I will say like I will say sometimes it can be over the top. That was me when I thought of well, it was just in my head. Strive, yes, Strive. When I first saw Strive, like with the dust, they were like, trying to make it like movie action movie like,
yeah,
and like the camera like turns and it makes it like it made me dizzy at first. So I think there is such thing as overdoing it, and there's also such thing as it being the sole reason for a flop, which like a perceived flop. Excuse me, and that's the case with like things like KO14, which actually did not flop as hard as people thought. It sold a lot better than KO13 for that matter. So there's a clear edge that someone can gain out of like having poor visuals that is gained in marketing. And MVCI probably did the opposite of that, which contributed to its hard drop. And themselves pulled the plug on that game very early. They I mean that was partly their fault, with that. But yeah, there's again a lot of factors with how visuals become like the selling point, right? But I do bring up the Strive example because I do think it can be overdone, and I also do think that there's a certain point where you can say I've done enough with making this game presentable, and now the rest of it is just getting the enjoyment out of the actual experience. The UX, the progression, like how it feels as you get better, and then also of course the marketing, the pro scene. All of that becomes factors into how much it succeeds. But again, this is a super dense topic. I do want to continue chatting about this. If you got any other points to mention.
Yeah, adding on to that, I like the point you talk about how the game can overdo it. I actually think this is a problem tag fighters run into a lot of time. Like, let's go back to Marvel 3, for example, because I think it's a very good example of this. For example, Marvel 3, it has it's very memorable because of the way they draw the characters in a very like comic book art style. They have all the comic book like kind of sound effects with the announcer or with the marvelous combo, like stuff like that. But I think one of the problems Marvel 3 can run into for a lot of newer players getting into the game, or just spectators, is definitely the overstimulation of stuff on the screen. Like how many times in Marvel where you just see like Doom's plasma beam going off or missiles getting launched into the air, Virgil is rapid slashing all over the screen with like teleports and swords is on the screen. It's like there's so much visual noise in Marvel that like watching it or getting into it can be hard at first, which is why even certain like most players specifically play on like 1 to 2 stages just because they want to be able to see the screen. And that's why certain people they get angry when people pick correct colors. Like for example, the main stage people play on in Marvel 3 is Bone Wonderland, just because it's completely a white background, so it's very easy to see everything on the screen. But the problem becomes when some people even pick the specific white skin colors just to have that competitive edge where their character starts blending it into the background. And I know other games can have troubles with this too. Like for example, I think one thing that can make it very hard for people to pick up Zato, for example, in a Strive, is that he has so much stuff going on with Eddie in the background that people really don't know what's going on. And it gets the same problem that's emphasized when you pick like certain colors of Eddie on stages, where you pick like Zato, the white skin on the snow stage, and all of a sudden you can't see where Eddie is at all on the screen. Which I think some fighting games have to do a better job of, where they make certain colors, but they don't really account for the fact that they have stages where these colors become unseeable. Like I think no one would like if Eddie's twerking on you and you can't see if he's doing a pose or like sword soup or whatever, and then he's just flying around the air like, where did he go? Like I can't see him. He's blending in the snow. Same thing also with like when certain characters like pick certain moves, and because their color palette swaps between the colors, like you physically cannot differentiate certain moves. Like in Strive, for example, if they pick orange Zato, dust blends in with Eddie because Eddie becomes orange, so then you can't see the overhead that well. Or like in Melty Blood, every single character palette like switches like the color of like certain moves. Like Pokonoi, not Pokonoi, sorry. It's one of the maids. I forget one of the maids. I think it's
Yes.
Kohaku Half Moon, where her bombs change depending on the color. So then like people like in between matches they'll switch colors on purpose. So then all of a sudden you don't know like wait is this medium bomb that they can like attack into, or is this light bomb that goes off immediately? I think that's one thing that can happen with the over stimulation of fighting games, where they do too much, where they don't account for certain gameplay flaw designs through the visuals. That makes it very hard for new players to get into a game if they happen to run into somebody that uses that specific color on a certain stage because they want to have that competitive advantage.
Yeah, it's an excellent thing you bring up. One of my friends was actually talking about this a while back, and I think the logs are actually in this very server still. But basically, it had to do with Kunkka and Dota, and he used to have this skin that would make his like I think it's like water spout move. I don't know what it's called. Dota players out there, correct me, please. But basically, if you did it on the mid river, it would be borderline conspicuous, right? And
I see. Wow.
Germans. Anyway, like the point is, it's hard to see, right? And
Yeah.
And that was what was brought up in the context of talking about Lumina when we were first shown gameplay footage. A lot of the hit effects are very vibrant, like they're very in your face, right at you. This is kind of how Unio was back in the day as well. For those OGs out there, the hit effects, the hit sparks were very emphasized, and maybe perhaps to a flaw because it made it a bit harder to parse what was happening visually. Not whether you got hit or not, just a matter of like just seeing what you would expect or not. And speaking of seeing, this is perhaps something that's not as related to like graphics as much as it's related to animation. And again, visual is a very dense subject, right? We could be talking about the numerous branches that are related to it, but I felt like it's worth mentioning while we're still here. Oria's 6B in Uni versus Akatsuki 6B. I did not know that Akatsuki had the fastest 6B, or fastest standing overhead rather, in the game.
Yes.
Recently. And that stunned me because I was like, that's so easy to block, right? But it's because of how distinct the animation is compared to his other move animations. Whereas Oria has like a bunch of moves where it's just like her clothing is still spinning in the same like trajectory or whatever as the 6B, but then it's just so confusing when you see the 6B compared to like 4C into 2A, right? Like the Uni players know what I'm talking about, but I'm not saying it's like impossible to block it. Like you have to definitely train yourself a bit, but it still makes for a unique experience in terms of how visual parsing can happen for anyone that seeks to, raise themselves along the competitive ladder in that game. And more on that, I guess, as we go along here, to, shifting topics. But I was gonna mention VF as well because this is a big one. Mm-hmm. And Zenru, I know you're watching, so make sure to leave a comment on this in the live chat while I'm talking about this. So VF had a recent update, or maybe perhaps update doesn't do it justice. It was basically like a remaster, right?
Okay.
That was released last summer specifically, around the same time that Striver's released. So already the competition was fierce, right?
Yeah.
And that probably didn't do much help, along with the fact that it wasn't having real rollback, right? The previous versions of VF was notorious for being very visually difficult to understand for a spectator that's not familiar with VF, just because there's not hit sparks at all. You have to find the sound effect. The sound effect is actually the only thing that allows you to understand whether there was a hit or a block. And unless there was a counter hit, the counter hit shows a very distinct effect that's like blue or red, depending on what kind of counter, or sorry, blue or orange, depending on what kind of counter hit it is. But that only occurs in very specific situations, such as side counter hit or hit like counter hitting them after their animation is finished, like for a punish, for example. But basically, there's like numerous forms of counter hit, and those are the only things that had a distinct hit spark for them. Normal hit or normal block you're out of luck there, man. You just got to hear the sound effect. That was super dated, by the way. It was a really poor
Yeah.
sound effect. But fast forward to the remaster, Ultimate Showdown, they did that, and that was a good fix. Now, a lot of the OGs were very disappointed about this at first because they're like, "Oh, this is making it super casual. Like the babies are."
What are they doing?
No, actually, people said this. I'm not even joking. People said this. Like they're like, "Oh yeah, this does not have the real VF flavor in it because it doesn't have real VF doesn't have hit sparks. It doesn't appeal to
Yeah,
these
this is
you
my
know
VF.
yeah, not my VF. But I was like, this is a great change. This is that like Zenryoku knows this. That's what I was complaining about. I was hoping that they would address this in any future VF version, and they did, and I was so happy because that's like the most important part for the spectator experience. Seeing something as simple as normal hit versus block without having to rely on sound effects, because oftentimes I actually play with sound muted, and
Yeah,
playing with
no,
sound muted is a death sentence in VF.
yeah. I couldn't imagine the nightmare it was for any tourney organizer to play that game because every setup would have to have sound unless they wanted to make the game unplayable from what it sounds like without sound
Exactly.
on.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I know Hotashi does top eights without sound in
Hmm.
Strive, and good for him because I can actually agree with him. Like sometimes hearing the crowd sound could be like energetic. It could I mean especially if you tune it out well anyway. Like it can be like you can turn around and then hear them right away without having to take off your headphones, something like that, right? But for VF, you had no choice but to hear the sound, at least back then. But the remaster, now that you don't have to worry about that anymore, not only makes it easier for spectators to know what's going on, but also makes it easier for players where, sometimes the visual stimulus is not as sometimes you need like extra stimulus to help guide you in terms of what's actually happening. Because even though sound stimulus is faster, this is like
Hmm. Hmm.
done in scientific studies, sound stimulus is faster. That's not enough on its own. It's always nice to have something reinforced by additional stimulus, which is in this case the visual one. And especially if one is not available to a person, then they just become severely handicapped in a way that I think, it's a super unique problem that unfortunately, the boomer devs that the VF guys over there are. I guess they didn't realize that that was a problem until the remaster, but it was a good fix. It was one that I was really happy for, and to go further along that, some of the other updates they did, all of them were visual. There was not a single number change. There was not a frame data change. Everything was visual, and yeah, it was an upgrade. But keep in mind, like just getting that additional attention in a modern context can really do a lot for a community, even if it's just the exact same game. Now, of course, there were a lot of factors that, again, contributed to the fall, right? But in the end, I think it did its job well enough to give people a modern port of, a game that people already liked a lot and didn't really need dramatic changes, to be honest, anyway. But the visual update is a huge buff for people seeking to get into it. Like myself, I was trying to get into it again, and
Hmm.
Zenroku as well. It can immediately make you stronger as a player. Just having that, uh, um, better improved visual experience. Mm.
Yeah. I like to add on to a game that I would like to say is in an interesting boat in the visuals department. I think it does something very good, but also something very poorly. And that game I like to talk about is Undernight. So I think Undernight, let's talk about the benefits. It has very beautiful pixel graphics. It's very easy to distinguish its UI for the most part, but I think some of the problems it runs into is the fact that the character designs are pretty generic. Like, what do I mean by
Mm.
that? Like, for example, if you showed me like Byakuya, for example, I would be like, okay, this is just like some generic, like, 1990s anime character that looks like some type of like B range villain. And I think the problem though is that I think Byakuya is one of the most interesting gameplays in the game, but he just looks so generic outside of the claws. Like everyone always memes saying, "Oh, look, it's you, Narukami," because he looks just like him. But I
Yeah.
think that's one of the problems with like gameplay wise is that like if you look at like Byakuya maybe, or like if you look at like Lene or like Nanase, you're just like, oh, these are just like we have a middle schooler with claws, we have a little girl with hoodie on, and we have a schoolgirl. Like, what do these characters do gameplay wise? Like, you have no idea looking at them for the most
Hmm.
part, like what they actually do gameplay wise. Yeah, and I think that's a problem I think Uni kind of fails in is that like a lot of its characters, if you just look at them, since they don't really carry their weapons in like their character portrait or like their actual like character model, when you look at them on the character select screen, you just kind of get a rough idea of like from their facial expression if they're like what type of character they are, but you don't understand gameplay of what they actually do until you see them in a match, which I think is the problem. And I think that was like a reason why Uni, at least in my perspective, was kind of hold back until the Evo announcement, was because people probably saw this game and said, "Oh, like what did these characters do? This game looks so chuny. It looks so average and generic. Like, why would I play this game?" Until they actually saw gameplay, they were like, "Whoa, this game looks amazing in terms of gameplay. I'm gonna play it." Which I think a lot of fighting games have done better on, because you have very distinct character lines you can tell from an immediate perspective. But I think Uni lacks in that regard. That even though it has beautiful pixel art, and once you see moves, it's very easy to see them for the most part. You don't really see the characters from initial glance, as opposed to other fighting games.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, I mean that's a great example, and they did do something very peculiar in another department that's related to visuals, which was all the words on the screen, and that has its own appeal that I think probably does have to be boxed in like a separate category. But you're right, though. Like I think that's just the issue of you know a lot of anime fighters using the same kind of tropes, and a lot of the tropes end up having these cookie cutter designs, which unfortunately does lead to a very specific kind of first impression that can hold back a lot of these, niche titles. But I do want to, I do want to see if Joe has anything to comment on while we're still on the topic of visuals. Anything that you like to get in here?
Yeah, if Jump Force had only the gameplay and like nothing else, it'd actually be do all right. It'd do all right. That's what I'd say.
Stick figures.
Yeah, no, like I've been playing through this game. The effects are cool. The effects are like really nice. Like if you actually looked at them. It's just when they have the camera zoom up on the models and it's like a 5-second pan on this, like, bro. Then you start to see like, bro, this game looks like dog water. But like in the gameplay with all the effects, dude, it's sick. This game is sick. But Jump Force has a load of problems. Like, don't even get me started. I feel like the visuals are all right from like a effects standpoint. Like when you're in game, like I could care less what they could be stick figures and the effects would just carry the game, like literally. Like if you saw like in the video earlier, like Trunks is like Slash where he slashes Frieza, spoiler alert, and he kills him, right? In this game, it looks so sick. It's actually so sick, like. But then you look at the model, and then they have every battle you have like a 10-second intro where they like have like the terrible voice, like they like their model is like lifeless, and then they have like the voice thing, and you're staring at it for like 20 seconds. Like it's like, okay, bruh.
Yeah.
Like if it just went straight into the game and you just played, dude. Like I think visually, like I mean, look at this world, bruh. It actually looks sick. I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like.
I think the stage looks fine, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, bruh. Like, see, if I'm running around, the model becomes, like, second. Like, you're not really paying attention to it. And then, like, you look at the special moves, bro. Look, the special moves are sick. Like, the particle effects in this game are so good.
Yeah, I think it's just an issue with the shading then. Because, I mean, clearly, like most of the aspects of the effects and stuff are fine. And, like, even the textures are fine, too, I'd say. But, as we saw with 14, as we saw with Exart in the first release, shading makes the world of difference. It's seriously a huge difference maker. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just want to say, like, I think one thing that I'm going to say this is kind of a problem I think Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite has a similar issue to Jump Force, where I think gameplay-wise, it's a very well-made game. It's just, graphically, it's so off-putting that you don't want to look at it. One thing, though, I think that kind of made it a problem for Jump Force is just that the nature of the game itself. Because you're making this game that has all these famous manga characters from Jump Force, and you're trying to put them all into one game, every mangaka has very different, distinct art styles. And when you're designing the 3D models, you kind of have to reflect that if you want to make it an accurate representation of the game you're trying to make. So that means you have to have a lot more cost development making the game, because you have to try to make the model look like that, character from the actual series. It has to be in the style of that artist, or you have to get the artist to take time off making whatever current thing they're making to be able to help animate or help actually give you a base design for the game as well to do so. Which I think with Jump Force, with what it had, I'm not sure the budget it had on the game, but I'm assuming that they didn't have the time nor wanted to put in the effort maybe to do so. Didn't have the, they had limitations to do so, which is why they had to go with this more generic 3D type of model instead of having each model be a lot more customized. Because if you look at the JoJo fighting game, for example, that one's a little bit easier because it's all like one art style really, but all of them are in the exact style from the manga or anime, which I think definitely hurt the game. I agree with Joe, just looking at the gameplay right now. It looks pretty fun, honestly, to play around and mess with, and the special moves are pretty sick, and I like the particle effects. It's just that then we have like this close-up of this character, I'm like, oh, this does not look like what they look like in the show. Like, you get this off my screen. I don't want to see this 20-second cinematic anymore, which is where I think it runs into a problem.
Yeah, definitely. Like I think back to like the Ultimate Ninja Storm series, right? Great series, by the way, for any casual fan, even just for a person that loves Naruto and just wants to mash buttons. I think it's a fantastic series. Now, of course, competitively, that's another story, but and arena fighters, never have been like that for the most part. But because it excels in the visuals, I give it a pass. It's just a great experience for any anime fan. And I wish that Bleach, my favorite, series, had that itself, because that would have been like the dream, having the Bleach guys in that art style, and with that kind of, gameplay, of course, representing the different abilities that they have instead. But that would have been cool. Regardless, though, that seems to never, I wouldn't say never, but maybe it's not going to ever happen at the moment, just because all these other series are doing so well right now. With the, upcoming resurgence, with the 1,000 Year Blood War arc getting animated, though, in October, that might change, I guess. We'll see. But it does have to do some pretty good numbers for that to happen, I'd imagine. But it sounds like we're kind of settled on what we think, like what there is to say about visuals. If there's anything else that you guys want to add quickly before we move on.
Yeah, like I think we've talked about how visuals have like influenced character decision and such, and gameplay wise. There's just one more thing I want to say. I think that having a unique art style is necessary for fighting games. The reason why is that I say that is because of DNF and like Grand Blue Fantasy Versus. Like, I think people really said it like on release for both games, or like when they were revealed. But I'll say it too. Like art-wise, they look the exact same to me, which I think is kind of a problem. Where people see DNF Duel or vice versa, and they think, "Oh, this game is just this other game," and like I already have the other game. Why would I play this one? Which I think definitely hurts sales because you're not really trying to appeal to a different demographic. You're trying to appeal to an existing demographic and get their players, which won't always work.
Right, and they'll just think, they'll just think, it's the same product, and they didn't really do enough to market that it was a different enough gameplay. Again, when you have things like that are so simplified in the gameplay, it's hard to set yourself apart from what you've already done if the visuals is mostly the same. That's, again, like kind of a nuanced topic. Perhaps we kind of beat that horse already in 2 episodes ago. But yeah, definitely a good thing to point out, Fox. Thanks for taking the time to point that out.
I want to say something before we go as well.
Yeah.
I might get a hate for this, but I'm sick of people saying they like Skullgirls. I'm sick of it.
This is a take.
You can say you like Skullgirl, you like the art style of Skullgirls, but please do not tell me you like Skullgirls the game, because you're capping. You're capping 100%. You probably put like 2 hours into the game, and you're like, oh yeah, I like Skullgirls. No, you like Skullgirls the art style specifically. I'm tired. I'm tired of people like on Twitter, on everywhere saying, yeah, Skullgirls such a great game, such a cool. Nah, shut your stinking mouth. I'm gonna. You can flame me all you want, but that game is dog water. Like the art style might be great, but that game is dog water. Don't get me.
I think it takes a very specific player to like Skullgirls. I can also admit it. I played the game for like 30 hours. I think the game was fun, but this is like a separate topic, so like let's not dwell on it too deeply. But
just want to put some heat in there. I just want to put some
the art. Yeah, the art style of Skullgirls is very well done, but having a game solely revolved around resets and like incoming mix is not for everyone. I think, especially when it's like you get hit and then you have to deal into, are they going to go into a restand like three-way mix-up, or like they're going to go into this grab reset midair? Not for everyone, but
you can appreciate
kind
the
of
art.
agree with
you
it.
can appreciate the art. I'm not gonna blame you for appreciating the art.
Wow, that was a very that was a very unfiltered take. I like it. That's what we want here. All right. Anyway, we're gonna move on now to controllers, because I feel like there's another dense subject that again requires some historical context to establish, the nature of what we're discussing here. So just keep in mind like how the FGC has moved from the days of the arcades to now to like the home console period, and now to like the age of online, where everyone's been using PCs more and more. So if we kind of start with where, back in like the 90s, where arcades were booming and we had all these cabinets at multiple, places, for lack of a better word. All these arcades had a very like distinct parts based on like the region or area you were in. Like, American arcades oftentimes had this bat top and convex or concave, I don't know which one, but basically the one where it curves downward. Those buttons people grew very accustomed to at the time. And then you go to Japan, where they have the famous Sanwa parts with the ball top and these the curved upward buttons that people are very accustomed to on their arcade sticks nowadays. And then you go to Korea, where they have bat tops once again, but they have bat tops notably without the restrictor gate. They have instead this like wooden, I don't know what you want to call it, but like there's like no barrier for the lever itself. It's just you just swirl the stick around, and that made it really good for Tekken, I suppose. But definitely something that the people got used to over there. And then, of course, we transitioned to the home console era kind of around the end of the 2010s and the beginning of the end of the 2000s and the beginning of 2010s, when SM4 came out. A lot of people got their 360s and their, PS2s, PS3s for all of that, right? And most of the time, people, like the hardcore community, would still play on sticks and stuff because that's what they were used to. It was still the same generation at the time. But that's also when we started seeing more of those people using the stock controllers. And there was, I definitely recall this very distinctly. There was a couple of people in the community at the time. I guess it was a relatively popular opinion held. It can be interpreted as like friendly banter or legitimate beef. But regardless, there was definitely a group of people that were like, arcade stick supremacy, and pad players are looked down upon to some degree. It was like, oh, you're a pad player, you must be really good, kind of thing, because stick was seen as an advantage at the time. Perhaps true, because the arcade games were being made for the arcades. What else would they be made for? And then when they're being ported to old consoles, using a stock controller was something that would not be thought of, because it was like, this is a lot harder. Especially I think of KF13, playing that on the 360 pad was just asking for trouble. But now we kind of transitioned to like the end of the SF4 era, going into SF5. We had a lot more like youngsters, I should say, coming in, like Knuckle Doo and Punk. They were coming in playing with pads, and these guys were monsters, right? And a lot of people are like, "Yo, this is awesome." Even Cloud805, he was playing Marvel 3 back in 2013, 2012 with the 360 pad. Incredible, right? But as we got into like the 2016 time period, that's when just everything in general was being made with home consoles in mind, because arcades were slowly like dying all across the world. So that's when, you know, you could perhaps say that inputs weren't as strict because you wouldn't need to chain multiple of them in a row, or the inputs themselves were becoming more simplified. So dock controllers would be more suitable in that case, yeah. But at the same time, we have a younger generation coming in, and they were not the ones that were necessarily playing at these arcades. So they were just, you know, using whatever they had, which was these stock controllers. So with this context in mind, we have a very notable switch. And I say all of this without even mentioning the advent of Hitbox, which was kind of a movement that sparked in the late Mobile 3 era, like, you know, 2014-ish.
Yes.
This was when it was being like heavily parroted on YouTube, like, hey, this Hitbox makes your lightning loops better. And I remember seeing the video for it, and I was like, oh, that looks cool.
Yep.
I saw the price, and I was like, nope, no, thank you. So, yeah, if you want to comment on that, Fox, I think that's enough historical context for now for us to make some comments.
Yeah, I think nowadays, going just to the 2016 part, nowadays, your controller does not matter. It is
100%.
Personal preference. Just because most fighting developers design with pad and stick in mind, and then I guess, you know, cheater box, they don't really design in mind, but you know, it's there. I will say that like specifically, if we're going by like straight ergonomics, I do think pad. Specifically, I think I forget the brand of the pad. It's the pad that has like a arcade layout though for its buttons. So it has like
Fighting Commander.
Fighting Commander, yes. I think that one and cheat box or hitbox or like mini box, you know, snack box, the whatever you want to call it or whatever like version of hitbox you're using, are arguably the best just because of your hands don't kill themselves in the process. And like they do offer like slight competitive advantage. Like for example, like Hitbox being able to do certain inputs cleanly every single time, but you sacrifice, you know, ease of like motion inputs sometimes, so like 360s and 720s. There is like a slight competitive advantage, but I think we're at the point where like no one has like fighting games solved to like that extreme of a level where your controller matters. So it is just personal preference. Although I do think there is like theoretically in the game where we're all perfect robots, there is a a perfect controller. But yeah,
I definitely agree with that. It's interesting to see how like we've gone into like the post Hitbox era, like where a lot of people are using Hitbox, not just because they're sponsored, but because we have all these people that are growing up playing on PC, which I actually failed to mention.
Yes.
But as we got into, because I remember this very distinctly as well, I think it was around like the 2013-14 period, a lot more fighting games were starting to be put on PC because there was a time period where next to nothing was on PC in terms of fighting games. But now that we got more on PC over time, a lot more people started playing on keyboard because it's like what they had already. You don't need to convince someone twice to say that they're playing on keyboard if they're, you know, already on PC. No. Like everyone has a keyboard that has a PC, so it's like the straightforward option, right? And then you have this Hitbox, which was still being marketed at the time. It's like, hey, you're a keyboard user. This is ideal. And yeah, that's when people started switching over to Hitbox over time with that PC resurgence. And then also, you know, there's also Mixbox as well, which I think was seen as an alternative for people that preferred the WASD format. Although I think Mixbox was kind of like it kind of suffered from being too expensive as well. More so than Hitbox though, because again, just didn't have the marketing leverage that Hitbox did since it was building up its reputation at the time. Yes, you can still make this rig Jace. Are you? Yes, let me say yes. But yeah, so then we look at 2016 SF5 crossplay on PS4 and PC. Boom, that was the big push, I think, to get everything on PC by then, because that's when Tekken 7 eventually came to PC too, as well as old Street Fighter 4s, as well as old BlazBlues at the time were also being ported to PC. But basically, everyone was like you know, keyboard, Hitbox. Like people were just on whatever they were used to. Yeah. And then I think now we're kind of in the post-COVID plus post-Hitbox era, where people wanted to like sit cozy at home and not have to worry about like having to travel. So that's when a lot of people are like, yeah, this is fine to buy a hitbox because, you know, I'm not going to really take this anywhere. But if I do eventually take this anywhere, eventually I got to have something that's portable, which is where Snackbox came in. Snackbox being like the best portability
Yes.
option, I think, was huge for it because that was also the time period where Hitbox was in some controversy with like lawsuits, I think. They had started something against a snack box company called Junk Food Arcades, and basically they're like, "Hey, you can't use this layout because we have a patent on it," which is kind of nonsense. I mean, this layout is not something that you can really uh, patent very easily unless you've gone down that road for like several years and established yourself as the only competitor, right? Which Hitbox had certainly not done. There are plenty of you can call them what's the word, like bootleg hitboxes, right? That were out back then, and they were doing nothing about those. So they clearly didn't. They clearly didn't have an issue until they're actually being challenged by a legitimate competitor, I suppose, which was what
Yes.
Snapbox became. And from there, I think people started to slowly lose like confidence in Hitbox that weren't already sponsored by them, unless you know they'd already had one or they were just trying to build a custom one. But building a custom one is cheaper anyway, so I think a lot of people were kind of doing that already. But from what I've noticed at this past Evo, a lot of people brought Snackbox with them, and then they were saying like, "Hey, this Snackbox is cool." And then they're like adding Junk Food Arcades, and Junk Food Arcades would retweet it and all of that. So basically, like all that natural word of mouth marketing that they're getting really helped them out, and I think leads us to where we are now, which is it's like a free for all for whatever controller you'd like to use. I think that's what you pointed out earlier as well.
Yeah.
There we go. What's up, Rig Jace?
Hello.
So
Any
you joined us for
opinions on controllers, good sir?
Controllers? I mean, I've used both stick and Mixbox. I mean, I think it's really just down to whatever you're comfortable with, is it not?
Yes, I agree.
There's also, I mean, you can't forget the cheat box advantage. That is a thing. But I don't know. It's hard to say what's gonna come of it in the future. If everyone starts using Hitbox, will they ban cheatbox, or will that just be what people play on going forward?
Yeah. Adding on to that real quick, I do want to say that I think there needs to be a little bit stricter rulings on like controllers. Like I know that Evo has like a list of like, oh, here's what you can use for controllers and everything as long as it follows our guidelines. This is a legal controller you can do, which is why people make their own, custom hitboxes or custom sticks, stuff like that, right? But there are some times when people take it just a little too far. I'm not sure if you guys know this player. He goes by the name of 2GB, 2GB. Very talented fighting game player, primarily known for like Undernight. He had some good tops in like top eights in Dragon Ball when the game first came out.
Is he the Rock Band guy by any chance?
He is not the Rock Band guy. Let me try to find a picture of his stick, but let me just say it follows all of Evo's rulings, but it is so monstrous that people have been like saying that this controller should not exist. Let me post a picture of it in voice text. Maybe one of you could show it on stream or something. But actually, I'll post it in the chat if anyone wants a image to it. But when you see this is a legal tournament controller according to Evo guidelines, and this controller is so cursed. According to him himself, when he went down to Texas to play in an Undernight tournament, after every game he played, he had to unplug and replug his stick to reconnect it. So I think there comes a time when controllers have gone too far, and I think this is one of those cases where we need to start making some more rules about what should be allowed or not, because he has this amalgamation of a Dance Dance Revolution pad on his controller, and it's
Something happened? Oh, my Discord crashed.
So he was able to make this himself, which I don't think everyone will be able to do.
Do you happen to remember Daigo's first hitbox, the Gaffro box?
I actually do not. What was the contention with that one?
That got banned because he had apparently like too many macros for different things.
Mm.
So
Wait, sorry,
you
one
could
second,
like
one second, guys.
Yeah,
think
my
this-
Discord crashed, so we just lost like the last 15 seconds of what we just said.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
I guess I'll just repeat it. So, we have this amalgamation of a controller, and I was wondering if you guys think. Oh wait, are you still live? Or are you still resetting it?
Yeah, it's live. Yeah.
Okay,
It's- yeah.
Okay, I was gonna ask then. Do you think? Let me repost it then. So, do you guys then think that we should be getting rid of this controller or banning it because of the competitive advantage it gives to someone? And also because not everyone has the resources necessary to make a controller like this, or the fact that 2GB himself is actually an engineer, so he was able to make this himself, where not everyone's going to have that type of background to be able to do so. And then Rig Jace was going to talk about Daigo's previous hitbox.
Go ahead.
so his previous hitbox had apparently a few macros that made specific charge moves with Guile much easier. He could do things on his Gaffro box that even hitbox I feel like I think you couldn't do. So that's kind of why they banned that hitbox. So and then the official hitbox gave him an official one to replace it instead. So he had to relearn muscle memory from the Gaffro box to the regular hitbox. So it's definitely happened before where controllers have gotten banned because they're just so strong. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really know what else to add to that.
Yeah, it's a difficult issue, I think. It would be nice for them to have specific like things like, all right, this is the number of buttons you're allowed to use, and this is how you're allowed to like map them. But again, like I'm sure they want to be hands off. Like that's like just been the tradition, right? Like for a long time, it's been like, yeah, bring your own controller. It can be anything that you like, as long as it doesn't use macros that aren't already available in the game, and it doesn't have these kinds of like functionalities that have been described before as like cheating, basically, where it's like, yeah, I can input I could input both forward and back and still get a sonic boom while I'm walking forward or whatever. But I like that, like all that aside, it's really hard to define a very specific like down to earth specifications for what controllers should follow, because again, like you want it to be still open as possible. You don't want it to be like, yeah, you have to use a stock controller or else, right? Because then that could be seen as a conflict of interest for the controllers that are sponsoring the event directly, unless they provide it for the people to use themselves, which I guess would be fine. But that's not happening anytime soon, as we probably see so far. But for this controller specifically, I look at it and I'm like, why? But I'm all for it for now. Like, I mean, this is necessary. Pushing the brink is necessary while we're still allowed to, because this is what causes these rules to be changed, right? It's like, because no one would really know that this would be within the allowable rules unless someone actually tried it, right? So that's where we are right now. That's how I feel like we should still approach this for now. But for something like Daigo's stick, understandably so, why it got banned. And even cross up, I did want to bring this up while we were on this topic.
How is that not banned?
Right? Like when I first saw that, I was like, oh, this looks disgusting. I guess they're right about the electrics thing, because you literally have like both the lever and the hitbox directional inputs.
Yeah, like you only need to move the lever in one direction, and then you can tap two buttons or something like that.
Yeah, no, exactly.
It's crazy.
But apparently, like pad, people are like, "Oh yeah, but pad can do this too." But pad like is
Not
not
in the
as
same way. It's
right.
very
No,
unintuitive
yeah.
in the way pad does it. You have to claw grip it, and it
Yeah,
doesn't really work.
exactly. And it's not like that. It doesn't have that built-in ergonomic kind of like design that cross up and hitbox have already. Like this is like a natural like hand position that you can be in and still do all the same stuff you're
Yes,
used to.
yes.
And you know, having the Velix Noir layout, like that's still personal preference, but it's not like those are available to pad player. They have to stick with this, you know, one size fits all stock layout. That's not ideal for most fighters. Whereas cross up hitbox meant with FGC in mind, obviously going to be used for some naughty things if they're, you know, capable of it. Yeah. Oh yeah. What do you guys think about the cross up? That like the first thing I saw of it was like easy electrics, but beyond that, I hadn't seen much about
I
it.
I have not seen much tech on it, but just from the tech I've seen solely on the hitbox, from like, you know, where they would show like, oh, you should get this controller. Like they're like Hitbox's marketing is all about like this gives you a competitive advantage. That's why you should buy it. And also
I mean,
because
they're
it's
not wrong.
yeah, which is true. It does give you a competitive advantage. Now, is that competitive advantage enough to actually warrant the price tag? Especially because I don't think controller matters. Like, it does strictly give you an advantage, but I don't think we're at the point where that advantage matters too much. But just from the tech I've seen off the hitbox, where I'm like, this is disgusting. Like, I can't believe this controller is allowed to exist in the same plane as these other controllers. I bet I can't speak too much, but I would assume that the cross up is even more disgusting in the terms of stuff you can do. Like there's a lot of charge stuff you can do on the hitbox that makes it so much easier. That makes certain characters like absolutely disgusting. Like for example, like Batista. I know like almost every Batista player uses a hitbox for the most part, just because it allows them to do some disgusting charge partitioning where they're able to like charge two different things at once. And because of that, they get like unreactable mix-ups that they would normally be a lot harder to do on stick or pad. So I am just looking at this. I would say this looks like not very fair to play against.
Yeah, I just want to add to the pad part. But speaking of pad, I think a long time ago, I think around the first or second year Street Fighter V was out, apparently there's tech where if you hold the opposite directions, you can block any cross up, like any
Yeah,
cross up.
yeah,
I don't know if that's still a thing or not, but I mean, obviously at that time, I like a pad player would like realistically not really do that in tournament just because you'd have to position your fingers in such an awkward way.
very awkwardly, yeah.
And then by the time you block the cross up and they land, like you can't really punish with anything because your hands are such an awkward position. But
hmm
if you had like a hitbox, like that shit's easy. Like you can do that. Or
Yeah.
cross up, you could do that
I
easy as
think
well.
yeah, it's like the same thing. Also, like a problem with like the D-pad is that like yeah, like since the D-pad only goes one direction, yeah, you'd have to have like the weirdest thing with even trying to attempt to do anything else.
You can
Which
buy
yeah,
replacement D-pads that, because you know how the top of a D-pad is just one flat button underneath all those four
I
buttons.
see, I see.
You can buy individual mechanical buttons to replace those.
Yeah. Something also I wanted to speak of, which I think is a premonition for the future. This is like, you know, I guess maybe not like, yeah, Smash is in the fighting game, right? But Melee, for example, I don't know how guys you have caught up with the Melee community, but they've gotten to a point where controller is a problem for them as well. They have the box, which is basically their version of a hitbox with like the most disgusting button layout known to man. But because of the way Nintendo acts for the game, modding controllers is completely legal. So you see like every person has like different things they can do with their controller, and they don't really have a set guideline of what they are allowed to have macros and not macros of. Like some people have reset their jump button to like Z and such, and change a lot of different things where people now are starting to complain about it because to play at like the top level, you need to have a certain controller to be able to actually do anything because they just offer so much more of a competitive advantage because they have certain notches to do other techniques that are normally way harder or less consistent. So I think that there's definitely more of a problem for Melee in that it has a very high entry to barrier in terms of the controller you need. Yeah, the melee hitbox cross-site I saw in the chat talking about the box is a very insane. Same thing with just GameCube controllers. Like there's something called the fob, where it has like specific notches where they made the controller specifically where it has certain notches to make like certain tech easier on Fox and like the spacies. And that controller is legal. And
For
like almost
one character, you make a controller for one character.
well, there's like other applications as well, but like it's like very noticeable with
I
like
mean,
certain other
he is
characters.
the only character in the game.
Yeah, but it's like kind of disgusting that a controller is necessary if you want to play like the highest level possible. Which I think is hopefully not where the FGC is going, but I think theoretically in the end game, like maybe 10 or 20 years where people get insane at these old games with no patches like Marvel and such, it might become necessary.
You know, I did want to bring this up. Speaking of, controllers that, you didn't need to know existed, but do. Ray Jace actually posted this not even a week ago. The Herbox.
Oh no. I saw
Yeah.
that. What does it do? It just three moving sticks?
The directional, so all these levers, I guess the left lever is still directional, but I think the right two levers are all for like button inputs basically.
What?
So it's the huge brain layout,
What the fuck?
Yeah.
That's disgusting. Oh, I can imagine like somebody oh no.
So yeah, I don't know. I don't know how this would give like an inherent advantage, but certainly this can be learned just as any other controller can be learned. So once people have a better idea on how that thing actually works, we'll probably have more to talk about this. But if you guys don't know already, I could post this in the chat. This is the Herbox.
Yeah, I saw it. And
yeah,
it's very interesting. I don't know what competitive advantage it would see, but yeah. Have you guys seen the Potemkin Pizza Box controller that has like 40 buttons so the guy can piano all the motion inputs? Yeah,
that is legal.
No, yeah, there's some like, there's obviously the very funny guy, like the guy on like the guitar controller, or the guy on like the steering wheel controller.
The Dakimakura controller.
Yeah, it's like most of those are memes, but it is disgusting when somebody has a controller that is like you think is a meme, but is actually like tourney viable or gives them a competitive advantage in some regard. Although a lot of them just don't make sense, like the DK bongos. Like let me pull up with the DK bongos to the tourney. But yeah, I think fighting games. I think in terms of controllers, you can play with whatever, but we are getting to a point where there needs to be, I think, stricter rules than the Evos, because I think Evo's rules are way too lax, especially with how they haven't been abused yet. But I think eventually, people, if the game becomes like more esports or whatever, like pots start becoming like a lot bigger, which is like a separate topic and problem in the FGC. I think people will start opting to learn or start making whatever controller they can make that still follows Evo boundaries while pushing the absolute limits.
right. Yeah, I agree with that. And since Evo is getting more corporate anyway, I'd see it as something that's in their best interest if they want to keep up the fervor for competition and all of that. As people start getting more sponsored, though, like it's interesting, right? Because Daigo's sponsored by Hitbox, one of his sponsors, and he used Hitbox against Jay Wong in this SF4 exhibition at Evo. And I mean, among other things, according to Justin Wong, that was one of the factors that played into his poor performance in that exhibition. Of course, it's not a serious one, right? But certainly people probably expected a much closer match than what it was. And as I saw it, it was like an SF5 match in SF4. They were playing vanilla SF4. And it was unfortunate, right? Because I guess Daigo hadn't played SF4 and Hitbox before because it wasn't really out at the time.
Yeah.
But you would think that the the idea, the concepts would somewhat stick. It just wasn't there for him. Whereas Justin Long, naturally he's going to remember everything. So it was a rough time out there. I guess since we're kind of wrapping this up, just want to make this last question, throw it out to you guys. Do you think that switching between controllers is something that has a significant enough impact on how a person can perform that we should, be ready to say that, all right, we're presenting this top player, but we need to mention his controller method as well?
I don't think so, at least at the moment. But I will say one thing is that certain games are easier on certain controllers just because they were designed with that in mind. Like, for example, like everyone says, like, oh, if you're playing Mortal Kombat and you're trying to play competitively, you must play on pad, for example. And a lot of the old arcade games were designed with stick in mind. Like, that doesn't say you can't play with another controller, but I do think certain controllers you have to play in certain games just because of how the game was like built in mind, which kind of makes certain games a lot harder to get into, just because you need that prerequisite. Like Melee, for example, you need either a box or a GameCube controller. It's one or the other. Mortal Kombat, if you're trying to play competitively, you need to play on a pad. So I don't think we're at the point where we have to mention, like, oh, this guy played on Hitbox, so his win is invalidated.
Right.
But we are definitely approaching the time where people will definitely look down upon certain people if controllers get nutty enough.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I just found it funny that Daigo was just completely like an average person in that context of that match because he was on Hitbox, according to Justin Wong. And for me personally, I wouldn't like. I will say, like, I think for me, like, pad and keyboard are easier for Tekken than stick. But that's because I use square gate, ball top lever. Apparently,
Yeah.
Like octagonal gate or the Korean style, gateless lever. Those are more ideal for Tekken, but I guess that also just depends on one's background, how familiar you are with those ideas and such. Retro, do you have any thoughts on this?
Octagonal gate versus square gate?
No. Just like different controller methods based on what you're playing.
It highly depends on the game. Like, if you're playing a game that doesn't require that much execution, any controller really works, to be honest. And in terms of like a technical advantage, like advantage with controllers, unless you normalize like your game so that like it takes inputs like equally with like every controller. I don't know how else to explain it. Like, for example, what's that thing, that processing thing you have to put into like a hitbox or like something?
SOCD?
Is it SOCD? It's like it's to make sure that the directions like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
You need something like that, but like it works for every controller, and so there is like no advantage, right? But
even then, there's still like hitbox shortcuts that you can do. Like,
but that's
because of SOCD.
But I feel like, yeah, I know. I was thinking about this because if you I'm sure there's a way to program it so that like you could only have one direction like inputted at like a single time, and like you must like press it for it to actually work, right? Because like for a hitbox, if you hold it down, like, and you like release the thing, it frame perfectly still triggers. Like if you're holding down left, for example, and then you press right, and then you let go of right, it's still registering like left inputs. Whereas like if you make it so that the input only triggers when you press it, like there's something like that would never happen, right? Like for those shortcuts that you're mentioning, that only works because it's still registering inputs as it's being held down. Whereas like if you have a normal stick, like, I guess it has to do that, but like, I don't know, little scuff.
No, but isn't that why you were like what you're describing, isn't that just turbo? Like you can, I mean, you can't turbo for the lever or the button or the direction things, but for face buttons you can turbo, and if you just hold it down, it will input it every frame,
Well,
and that's like yeah.
let me clarify. So like
Okay.
for a stick, you can only hold down like one direction. So if you go from right to left, right, it's right to left. But on like a keyboard stick thing, if I hold down left and I press right, it now registers as right, right? But then if I let go of right, it registers as left, even though I didn't press left again, right? Which is like not how it should be in my opinion, but is how it is. So there's where you get like the shortcut stuff that should, I'm not sure if it's intended or unintended, but I don't think it should be like that for keyboards at least.
So basically what you're saying is we should have NKR, but for hitboxes.
Well, I don't know what NKR stands for.
N key rollover. Just like basically if you press too many keyboard buttons at the same time, it will roll over those inputs to when you release some of them. And it's notable for like stock keyboards and keyboards on laptops, but for gaming keyboards, they usually have super high key rollover just so that you can press all the like keyboard buttons at the same time and it'll still register all of them at the same time. But it's worth mentioning that because if you play on keyboard, there's a lot of like layouts that just don't work inherently unless you use a billion macros. Some of which might not be available within the game, but you use like AutoHotkey or some, third-party macro plugin or program. Technically, there's nothing to ban you because most things don't have anti-cheat, but obviously wouldn't be allowed in a tournament proper. So it becomes controversial there. But again, like keyboard and hitbox are completely different planets, which is why there's no N key rollover concept at all with regards to hitbox. It's just all the techniques that you can pull off are available as they're available, as they designed it, things like that, I think.
I think like I think the main issue is that keyboards just like inherently 4 buttons or like 4 inputs versus a stick which has 8 inputs, right? And in order to replicate 8 inputs on a 4 input scheme, like you need to have like the holding down, right? It needs to detect whether you're holding down and right for down right, or like what? It needs to detect you're holding 2 and 6 in order to know that you're holding 3, right? There's no 3 or 9 or 7 or 1 on a keyboard layout. Like you needed to be holding 2, 6 in order to get 3, right?
Yeah.
So like in games where like 2, 3, 6 is like really strict, it's actually like harder on keyboard in my opinion. Like because you have to like actually roll your hands across S and D. Like you have to press S, press D, let go of and then let go of S. You can't just go SD. Like if you're like kind of lazy with the inputs, you could just press SD. That wouldn't work on games with like hot like that require the precision.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh no, yeah, I totally get it. I was because when I played 2D games, I was perfectly fine getting half circles on keyboard because you just roll the fingers on the keyboard and you just get it like pretty much every time. But when I did it in Tekken, I realized I was always missing a down input. I would have a down right and then I would have forward, down right, down left, and then down and then left.
Yeah,
and I would be missing like the down input because I'd just be rolling over so fast. Therefore, I would never get the move out. So I guess input leniency can also factor into that.
No, yeah. Apparently, that's like due to like the natural way of inputting a half circle on a keyboard involves a sub-frame button press or a couple of sub-frame button presses. So the game never registers it, right? Because it just refreshes once per frame. So that was an issue with Plus R that they had to fix with that lenient versus classic update, I think it was called.
Oh, I did hear about that.
Yeah, that affected hitbox and keyboard users both. Definitely was an important issue to address for them. But it sounds like a software side in that regard. Like a lot of this is kind of up to the devs to address because they're the ones that can actually create the rules and enforce them accordingly, as like to say that hey, this is what they designed to be possible. This is what's not designed to be possible. Things like that and they can disallow controllers that are foreign enough to be like a default for when it's uncertain whether that controller can allow for crazy things. I do want to get in this comment that Crosshead made. I think it addressed what Retro Rage mentioned earlier. There's different types of SOCD. Some have left and right equals neutral. Some has the last input override the previous input. So I guess in that regard, because there's no consistency in the standard, that could be part of the issue itself, and maybe having more standardized methods of SOCD can be what's necessary down the line. But I think we touched on a great deal of the issues and controllers that are necessary to cover. We're kind of getting on, let's see, an hour's length here. So any last things you guys want to get in before I close this thing?
I was just going to say, you brought up an interesting point with two different types of SOCD not having standard, because I tried a little bit of SF5 and I realized just because it has a last input override, it's just so easy to kind of always keep a charge with charge characters, because all you have to do is just tap forward to get it. And same with his super, you just have to hold back and then tap forward twice and you get super. It's so incredibly easy. But I tried to do that in Strive, and I did a charge back forward, and I realized it would not come out unless I actually let go of back to press forward, which made it a little bit trickier. But yeah, I just completely forgot that there's two different types of SOCD. So maybe if that was standardized in the future, they could kind of bring all the games and all the advantages down to like an even baseline.
You know what I do? Here's a hot take. Here's a real hot take. A real spicy take. Just remove diagonals from fighting games. No more crouch blocking. Just no diagonals. No diagonal command normals.
You want MK.
So everything's just 4 directions, and then you're good. You're good. You don't.
Bro, just play MK. They don't have diagonals over there.
Exactly. Very nice. Very nice. If there's one thing I like at NRS, no diagonals.
Yeah, that's a take.
Crouch blocking, no crouch blocking, just no diagonals, just free. It's the land of the free. Just do it.
Yeah.
Then it doesn't matter what controller you're using, because there's only 4 inputs, the minimum requirement.
Yeah, Sero says, man, the BFTG Season 1 special.
Oh.
With no blocking. I think it was like no stand blocking when you're switching from crouch blocking, something like that. That was pretty funny.
Just make all lows unblockable. The lows are just unblockable now. You can't block them. It's genius, just pure genius coming out of my brain right now.
You know what you could do? You could do the unthinkable that has never been done before, which is make blocking tap forward. Whoa, that is revolutionary and has not been done in a 90s fighter.
Instant block is coming back.
Only instant block, no normal blocking.
No, I'm messing around.
That'd be pretty cool, though.
No, I was being sarcastic. I guess it wasn't picked up as easily, but
I get it.
Yeah. I picked it up.
I got it, but just remove blocking. Who likes blocking anyway? I don't like blocking, bro.
You gotta have offensive blocking.
Just remove the back direction completely. You can only move forward. And it'd be, oh my goodness.
Getting hit is the only way you can go backwards.
Just absolute clownery.
This sounds like the most cursed fighting game.
Oh, it's dive kick. Dive kick, you can only move forward, right? Through with the dive kick power.
You can move back.
You can jump backward. Yeah, you can jump backward. You gotta dive on the ground. While you're on the ground, you just press the dive button.
I think you've reached the conclusion of it, unless we're only going to talking about this.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks so much for watching.
Yeah. You wanna finish it out? You wanna close it out, Furushi?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so you guys, we've touched on a lot regarding visuals and controllers, and I feel like both topics have yet to be fully expanded upon within our circle. So feel free to join for one of the future episodes. If you'd like to get in, voice yourself, and take the podium, spit out your hottest takes, all of that, feel free to join for one of the future episodes and send a suggestion to one of the members of the staff for topics that you'd like to see in future episodes, because all of these are, or not all of these, but a lot of these are community curated. So it really helps to get the involvement of the members to see what they'd like to see and discussed in some of these topics. But with that out of the way, I hope you guys enjoyed our talking at each other for an hour and 20 minutes or so. Yeah, just about. And hope to see you in the next episode.
Yes, indeed. I hope you see my avatar in your nightmares.